Episode 1, the ROI of Flourishing, measuring what really matters. Dr. John Beale's work as a research affiliate at the Human Flourishing program at Harvard emphasizes the importance of whole person well-being across measurable domains like happiness, health, purpose, character, and social relationships. My goal with this week's podcast was to connect his research to a wealth strategy that reframes wealth as a tool, not just for financial success, but for deeper life satisfaction and legacy. But before we get to that, let's get to know Dr. John a little bit. Dr. John Beale is a researcher, a writer, a keynote speaker, podcaster, and coach whose work focuses on how most effectively to promote flow and human flourishing in the workplace and education. John is a research affiliate at the Human Flourishing program at Harvard University and has previously held research positions at the University of Oxford and Eton College. He is the co-founder of Flowprone, a flow and high-performance training and coaching organization. He's also a coach for the Center for Human Potential and was previously a coach for the Flow Research Collective and was in fact my coach in the Flow Research Collective's Neuroscience Performance Coaching Certification Program. John co-hosts Flourish FM, a podcast for the good life, sponsored by the Human Flourishing program at Harvard and the University of Oxford's Department of Education. John has published articles in leading academic and media outlets, including the New York Times. He is the co-editor of 4 books, including The Future of Education, forthcoming from Oxford University Press. This book in particular, I'm really excited to read as soon as it's released. John has given over 50 invited talks and keynotes in 13 countries across 5 continents. These include invited talks at universities including Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and Yale, and keynotes at organizations including the Royal Society of Arts and companies including Disney World. Dr. John Beale, welcome to the Flourish Feed podcast.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for that beautiful introduction and for the invitation to speak on your fantastic podcast.
Well, for the Flourish Feed podcast, there is no one else I would rather have as the inaugural guest than Dr. John Beale. And the first thing I wanted to ask you today is, where did we find you? I understand you kind of happen to live and flourish in several different cities. Where did we find you today?
Yeah, I'm pretty nomadic. Today, though, you find me in my home city in London, in my office, which is actually a co-working space that I use, my favorite one to use. It's in West London. Yeah, at home, basically.
I also understand you've been through a very busy time recently launching your new endeavor called Flowprone. I wanted to know if you could lead us off today by telling us a little bit more about Flowprone and who is it built for and what is it you want to do for them?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I have co-founded this business, this training and coaching organization called Flowprone with 3 of my former colleagues at the Flow Research Collective, Marcus Lefton and doctors Carrie DeCandia and David Radosovic. You may know these people, Gillian.
I do remember them from several of the Wednesday sessions, yes.
Awesome. Yeah, they're 3 powerhouse coaches and facilitators and researchers. And we started this, so we have a training program called Flow OS, and we have an online platform called Flow Lab, which all listeners are welcome to join, where we host free monthly masterclasses and put out new resources we've built on there that help people get into flow and improve their performance as effectively as possible. And then we have our training program that people can learn more about through that. And the main reason we started it is that for years we've been working on training and coaching high performers to improve their performance and their well-being and ultimately reach flow states, flow being the state of optimal performance and attention where you push a skill to its limit in response to a challenge. And there's all kinds of benefits associated with experiencing flow deeply and often, which is known as being flow prone. So flow proneness is a person's capacity for having flow experiences, and being more flow prone is associated with reduced risk of several mental health disorders, such as reduced risk of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, stress-related disorders, and cardiovascular disorders, so also physical health disorders as well. And one of the reasons for this is that when you're in a flow state, everything else sort of fades away from consciousness, except the thing you're doing. So it's a great stress regulator, a great way of switching off from sources of stress. There's several other reasons for this too, and researchers are learning more about the benefits of flow proneness now. But the reason we call the company Flow Prone is because one of our aims is to enable people to become more flow prone. We measure flow proneness before and after our training programs because that's a fantastic outcome for people, right? If they can consistently and regularly get into flow more often and enjoy all the benefits that come along with that, such as some of those I've mentioned. And what we aim to do with our training program is really build high performance habits that last a lifetime. Because we found that in typical training programs, you've worked on many of them, there's a tendency to overload clients with loads of knowledge, tons of resources and stuff. You're getting big return on investment from that. Like, all these resources I'm getting is amazing. But if you focus too much on knowledge acquisition when you're trying to build habits, you focus less on the actual building of the habits, which is the ultimate thing you need to do.
That's cognitive overload, right? Like, you're not able to practice.
Yeah, exactly. So we are obviously, distributing lots of knowledge and so on, lots of resources, but we're focusing more on how to build high performance habits that last a lifetime. So we built a 7-month training program that does precisely that and goes through several key areas.
Amazing. And what I have to stay here on flowproness for just a minute, because I do find it fascinating. In your experience with helping people develop their skills for flow, or even acknowledge that they might even have some, do you find there are habits even that are maybe automatic from childhood that cause people to become more flow prone as adults? Or is it more that we as adults have to relearn that because of a series of other things that become part of our life as adults, like distractions and so forth?
That's a great question. I mean, children seem to be the most flow prone people in the world, if you think about any generation, in the sense that kids seem to be lost and immersed in what they're doing most of the time, right? They start doing a task and they just get completely immersed in doing it.
Yes.
Maybe not for that long, because they'll switch attention very fast, because they'll get bored of things quickly or want to do something new very quickly, get excited about something new quickly. The second they start doing something, often they're completely immersed in it. Everything from running around in the garden, to playing with a dog, to swimming in the sea, to playing a video game, whatever it might be, even watching TV. Like, I have a 9-year-old niece and a 5-year-old nephew, and they get immersed in everything they do, but you put them in front of a kid's TV show and bang, they're immediately immersed in it, which is one of the reasons why my sister doesn't, only lets them watch TV a certain amount of time a day, right? Because they could easily just get immersed in it for like 12 hours straight. Now, that kind of immersion in things is typical of a flow state. A flow state is where you're completely immersed in a challenging activity. Kids do this all the time. And for kids, often everything is challenging, but also they welcome the challenge. They want to learn more, and they're at a period of their lives where neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to be malleable in response to new stimuli, new experiences, and for synaptic connections to consolidate and strengthen and emerge in response to that, and for you to learn new things, is at its highest during that period of life. And they also just do things for the sake of doing them. So just play for the sake of playing, right? There's not a set of rules for the game. They often just play. And I'll say to my niece and nephew sometimes, "What are you guys doing?" And they'll be like, we're just sort of running around in a circle, playing something, doing something.
There's no outcome desired.
Yeah, they're just doing it, right? And that is also key to flow. Flow is what's called an autotelic experience. It comes from two ancient Greek words, autos and telos, meaning self and goal, meaning that you do something just for the sake of doing it, not for some further goal. And you find that people who tend to get into flow with a certain activity, it's the kind of thing they just want to do for the sake of doing it. So, for example, let's say someone gets to flow playing tennis or pickleball or ice skating or baseball, pick your activity. And you say to them, well, why do you do it? Well, of course, there'd be the benefits. Yeah, it keeps me fit, keeps me healthy, I meet new people and stuff. But it would often just come down to the fact they really enjoy doing it. And there is no goal beyond it. They're not maybe competing it. They just love doing it. Same goes for many activities, reading and so on. So kids are great examples of how to get into flow often. But your question is, what kind of tendencies from childhood kind of help people get into flow in later life? Yeah. It would be a tendency, there'd be several, but among them would be a tendency to gravitate towards doing creative activities, because creative activities are massive sources of flow. That's how flow research really began with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian psychologist. He looked at what creative people tended to do with their time. So it would be engaging in creative activities. Now, creativity is very broad, right? But ones that are very creative, painting, drawing, making music, and dancing, and so on. Also, activities that involve the whole body, such as swimming, doing yoga, and so on. You don't get many kids doing yoga, I guess, right? But swimming, for example, running around, these kind of things that really immerse you. Well, sports often do that. Those tend to be common sources of flow. And kind of continuing to keep up with doing these kinds of things that you discover in childhood, but also having that attitude of not making everything super practical and super kind of goal oriented, but actually just continuing to do some things for the sake of doing them. Like keeping up with that passion for reading novels. Just because you love reading novels, you don't do it because, well, I'm going to then create a Substack and write book reviews and monetize it. I mean, that's great if you want to do that, cool. But
sure,
you notice with people that just keep up with their childhood pastimes and continue to love doing them, but they don't have to kind of justify why they do them. They just love doing them. They'll tend to keep into flow, keep getting into flow doing those kinds of things.
I often think about this because I kind of look back over my life, and I was a competitive figure skater when I was a young person. And I know that part of my neurochemistry as a young person, I didn't really figure out how to be a mature adult until I had physical activity to that extent as part of my everyday. And I think, I wonder what else it is that we do in our childhood that we have to refine once we've gotten through all of the check marks of house and mortgage and kids and job and career and success. And that when we talk about the topic we're going to talk about today, which is to do with flourishing, how can we keep that mindset kind of on track as part of the journey instead of after the journey? Or maybe in some cases, people might even forget to go back to that part of the journey and not even know what flourishing is. So I'm hoping with your help today, we can really dig into this idea of human flourishing, which I know is a huge part of the work that you do. So maybe we can move on to what I think some of my clients want to hear and other people want to hear as ultimate joy, which, like, what is the ROI on flourishing? I mean, I know that there's lots of ways of looking at return on investment when it comes to the hard assets and to money and to jobs and careers and all those goal-oriented things that you talked about a few minutes ago. But I thought, why don't we see if we can take that concept of return on investment and have you tell us a little bit about the ways in which flourishing can be measured. Now, I know the Human Flourishing program at Harvard has something called the Secure Flourish Measure, and it stems from a very long-standing study that measures well-being the same way we measure performance in other areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that study and what the Secure Flourish Measure measures?
Yeah, sure. So there's multiple measures of human flourishing. The Secure Flourish Measure is the measure that's endorsed and promoted by the Human Flourishing program at Harvard, and that was developed by the Human Flourishing program's director, Professor VanderWeele. And there's two key measures. One is called the Flourish Measure, one's called the Secure Flourish Measure. Now, the Flourish Measure has 5 key domains in it. The Secure Flourish Measure has a 6th domain. Now, the 5 key domains are areas of life that research has shown significantly improve our well-being, and human beings tend to pursue as ends in themselves, things you do just for the sake of doing them, rather than as a means to some further end. The 6th domain that's added is one that is not an end in itself, but nonetheless significantly improves all other areas. I'll describe each of these in a moment. Now, I should add that theories of flourishing going back to Aristotle share a key point about their methodologies. Identify the key areas of life, or in some cases the one key area of life that human beings pursue as an end in itself. Because that explains, that helps us understand human motivation, why we're doing what we're doing. We're ultimately pursuing some ultimate end in life. And also, research on flourishing, going right back to Aristotle, looks for, what is the ultimate end of all our ends? What are we aiming for in life? What's the ultimate aim in life? And one thing that's often posited as the answer to that is to flourish. People want to flourish. That's the ultimate aim of life. Well, what does that mean? How can we understand that? With Aristotle, it was just one thing that was an end in itself, and that was this Greek term eudaimonia, which we would translate as flourishing or happiness. And for a long time throughout history, people thought there was just one ultimate end in life that we pursue just for the sake of it and no others, and that's flourishing. And some would think of that as happiness as well, and some people to this day think that there's just one thing that we ultimately pursue just for the sake of doing it, and that's happiness, and everything else we do supports that. So why do you play this sport? Why do you want to look after your health? Why do you cultivate your relationships? Why do you want to earn lots of money and so on? Pursue that career to be happy, right? Some people think that still. With positive psychology a few decades ago, Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and others who co-founded positive psychology argued that Aristotle was wrong to have just one ultimate aim, ultimate end in life, flourishing, eudaimonia, that there's multiple of these, there's several. And in positive psychology, you have something called the PERMA theory of well-being, with PERMA being an acronym standing for 5 key areas of life that it's argued we pursue as ends in themselves and all significantly improve our well-being. PERMA stands for positive emotions, happiness, joy, gratitude, laughter, and so on. Engagement, which is flow. Positive relationships, meaning and mattering, mattering is like the sense that your work matters and that you matter in your work, and accomplishment. And there's some theories that add an additional letter to it, H or V, health or vitality. The Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, what Tyler VanderWeele published in an article called On the Promotion of Flourishing in 2017, is he reviewed a huge amount of research and data from well-being sciences and health sciences, and meta-analyses and so on, to identify the key areas of life that are generalizable in the sense that most people tend to want them and most people tend to pursue them as ends themselves, and they all significantly improve our well-being, happiness, and in general the goodness of our lives, how well we regard our lives as going. And he argues that there's 5 key areas of life. It's not limited to these, but there may be more, and those are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtues, and close social relationships. Now the Flourish measure aims to measure how well those 5 key areas of your life are going. Then there's the Secure Flourish Measure, and this will be particularly important for this podcast, which adds a 6th domain, financial and material stability.
Interesting.
Now that's added as a 6th domain because it's not one that people tend to pursue as an end in itself, but rather a means to a further end. You want financial and material stability in order to
support those things.
Yeah, to support those things, to be more happy, to have more freedom, to support your relationships, so on. We can go deep dive into all this in a moment. But you need that support flourishing long term. Okay, it's very hard to flourish if you're working paycheck to paycheck, not knowing where your next paycheck's coming from. You can't afford to keep a roof over your head, and so on, right? So, we tend to talk of flourishing as a long term way of being. You don't say someone flourished for a week or a month. You might say that year of that person's life, damn, they flourished. Right. We might say in that person's in their 30s they flourished, but their 40s that was a bad decade, and so on. You might say that of someone's lifetime. But to sustain flourishing long term, you need a certain degree of financial material stability, which of course will be relative to a person's desires and aims, objectives, where in the world they live, whether they have children, all these factors, right? So it's all relative. That in a nutshell is the explanation, and I can share the link with you to Tyler VanderWeele's article that you can share in your show notes.
I think that's a very helpful introduction, because as something that we're looking to maybe invest some of our time and our money and our attention in, if we want to start buying into the idea that flourishing is how we want to live, which I think based on your argument we all do, we need a way of measuring it, and we need a way of creating, because I always say things that you measure get better, right? So if we have an understanding of what some of these areas are, then we can start to maybe accumulate some skills and some capital in these areas. So my next question has to do with this idea of, when I do wealth planning with people, there's really 2 pieces. There's the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. And a balance sheet is everything you own less everything you owe. So your pluses and minuses, and then your cash flow is all the things that are coming in and all the things that are going out. And I really like the idea that you just mentioned, which is that flourishing tends to be something that is achieved based on a longer period of time. It's not for an hour, it's not for a day. It's for maybe a year or a decade or a lifetime. So these wealth concepts of balance sheet and cash flow statement, can we contemplate what would be the parts of a flourishing balance sheet? What are the things that we're trying to gather, and what are the things that either add or subtract from that for us?
Yeah, great question, Gillian. Nicely put. Thank you. So I looked at all the kind of key contemporary theories of flourishing and major historical theories like Aristotle's and so on.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a way that's less, the way you phrase it is perfectly designed for this podcast. I love it. But it's kind of the more generic version is, okay, great, all this stuff on flourishing, wonderful. What's the most effective way to flourish? And given that there's different theories available, some of which are more robust than others, the one that Tyler VanderWeele has put forward, the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, is fantastically well supported by research, extremely rigorous. But if you look at, there's multiple rigorous theories by brilliant movements or institutions, organizations that we should take very seriously, and the work of Aristotle is still highly influential in this space. And
holds
rightly
up.
So.
Yep.
Yeah, and rightly so. I recently have written a piece which I can share in your show notes as well, where I look at all the kind of dominant theories of flourishing, the most influential ones from historical times to today, and I argue that we can extract 8 key domains of life that are all ends in themselves we tend to pursue. The areas of life we tend to pursue as ends themselves, and all significantly improve our well-being. And so if you wanted a reliable way to promote flourishing, either in your own life and/or in the lives of other people, it would be to do as much as you reasonably can to promote all 8 of these areas without your efforts to promote any one or more of them risking significantly depleting any of the others. Now, let me go into this a bit further. Flourish measures, they give you a score at the end of, you're taking a survey, but they don't tell you, therefore you're flourishing. You scored 78%, therefore you're flourishing.
I noticed that. It gives you a score, and I'm left to interpret it myself.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's good reasons for that. Flourishing is always relative to a certain degree to an individual and to the context in which they live, in terms of the kind of things that they're aiming for in life, their desires, the situation they're living in, and so on. The kind of areas of life they prioritize over others, that will vary person to person and culture to culture. There's nothing wrong with prioritizing your relationships over your work, or prioritizing your work over some of your relationships, as long as there's not a significant depletion across some of these, or prioritizing your health over your work, or prioritizing work over your health to some degree, again, as long as there's not significant risk of depletion across any of these. The way to look at it is to look at the measures as ways you can track your own growth over time. All right, just like you might use, say, a sleep tracker, or a way of assessing your HRV over time, or your calorie burn day to day, and you might look at it as, okay, here's how I can improve over time. I was scoring this, my sleep score was an average this in 2023. I'm aiming to improve it by 2 points by 2024, and so on average, and look for trends over time. You could think of Flourish surveys as that. You self-report your own data. Maybe you'll do it every quarter, every 6 months, or once a year, and you're aiming for growth. But also you need to take into account which areas of life you most prioritize. And as I mentioned, the key kind of rule of thumb is to look at the 8 areas and ask yourself, okay, I want to promote all of these as much as I can, but which ones really matter to me? And how can I promote those as much as I can without risking significantly depleting any of the others? So, for example, one of these 8 areas would be health. Another area would be love and relationships. And another area would be meaning, purpose, and mattering. Now, let's imagine that someone gets a huge amount of meaning from their work, as many people do, and they love their work. That's fantastic to hear, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working long hours in itself. But if you work such long hours that it has a negative impact on your health long term, you're chronically sleep deprived, you're never exercising because you're sitting at your laptop all day, and maybe as well your relationships suffer, your romantic relationships, they fall apart, you're always working, you hardly see your family, your friends, then that's a problem, right? Because areas of life that significantly improve your well-being and long term, they really matter for your life and the lives of others, they're suffering as a result of that.
They're in deficit. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But conversely, you get some people who really get obsessed about improving their health and are spending hours every day in the gym and tracking all their meals and tracking their sleep and getting quite obsessed about it. And nothing wrong with being really health conscious, right? And nothing wrong with tracking your meals and personalized nutrition, tracking your sleep. I do these things too. But if you're spending so much time on that you're then falling behind with your work, at risk of losing your job, and let's say you do enjoy your job, you don't absolutely love it, but you do enjoy it, and it's having a detrimental impact on potential career goals that you have that mean a lot to you, and you're not achieving them, then you've got another kind of imbalance across these areas. And you can imagine other ways that you have imbalance. Maybe, again, relationships suffer because you're becoming very obsessed with developing your health so much. You want to strive to improve each of the 8 areas as much as you can without significantly risking depleting any of the others.
And just being aware that there are 8, right? It's like if you went to school in elementary school and they said, well, there's just one class, it's math. You're just going to go to math class every single day. All you would ever know is that I have to become good at math. But fortunately, they expose us to multiple different subjects. And we as young people start to figure out, well, we need to be good at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different areas of life from a studies perspective. I like this suggestion that there are 8 ways in which I can keep track of how I'm progressing as a flourishing human. And especially if I'm feeling depleted or I'm feeling disconnected or I'm feeling anxious, I can use these to check in with myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to?
I would love you to.
Okay,
yeah, go for it. Yes.
So, for a long time, because I identified these areas in talks going back to 2022. Actually, if you go on YouTube for, just type in my name, flourishing and flow in YouTube, there's a talk I gave back in 2022 on this. And actually, Stephen Kotler and Michael Mannino from the Flow Research Collective are also giving a talk in that same session.
I'll include them in the show notes then. Thank you for that.
You want to include that link. But for ages, I was talking about these 8 areas of life, and sometimes, when giving talks or being interviewed, I would forget one of them. So I was like, right, I need to find an acronym for this. And then it was like, well, flourish has 8 letters.
Let's go. Yeah.
So here's the 8 using a flourish acronym, right? F for fulfillment. Now, fulfillment takes 2 forms in theories of flourishing. You have fulfillment of potential. You have fulfillment in the sense of life satisfaction. And theories of flourishing always focus on, they always include the first, like part of flourishing is to fulfill your potential, be on the path towards it as a human being. But some of them also include life satisfaction. Life satisfaction captures often what we mean when we use the word fulfillment more often. We tend to say we're fulfilled or contented, which means we're satisfied with the way our lives are going, right? So that's F. L, love, and this covers good and close social relationships, which research has shown are the greatest predictor of long-term health, happiness, and well-being. The Harvard study of adult development, which is the longest ever study of human life, it's been over 87 years, has found that
fascinating,
conclusively with rigorous research. Third, O, optimism and positive emotions. Right, so this encompasses happiness and positive emotions. I'll be honest, there is no emphasis on optimism above the others. It's just that begins with O. And he did an O for flourish. Just think of it as happiness.
It sounds like a happy emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is an important one, and there's research showing that you can learn optimism, and that significantly improves health and well-being. But it's not unique among all positive emotions, right? For U, we have unifying meaning. Now the unifying covers meaning, purpose, and mattering. So a sense of meaning in your life as a whole, in your day-to-day activities, a sense of purpose in what you do, and a sense of mattering. This has been identified in workplace well-being in recent years is really important. And positive psychology has added it to their theory of flourishing, that you feel like your work matters and that you matter. I mean, we all know that we could be replaced in whatever role we have in our jobs, even if we're self-employed and so on, but that nonetheless we matter such that it wouldn't just be right, see you later, bye, bring someone else in straight away. That you matter in your role.
Right.
Right, R, responsibility. This represents good character, which we can develop by building character virtues or strengths, and also the habits that help us do that. And this is vital for flourishing, and most importantly, it's associated with becoming a good person, okay, which is absolutely vital for flourishing. Because being a good person is someone who has a good set of character virtues or strengths. I, impact. This covers meaningful accomplishments. You're accomplishing things, but things that actually mean something to you, and that could be your long-term career goals, but it could also be just crushing it in a daily workout. Things that actually are meaningful and accomplishments too. Yeah.
Yes.
S is states of flow states. We've talked about that already. We can talk about that another session. And H, health, which covers mental and physical health, and vitality. Vitality being the degree of energy you have day to day. So if someone has the flu or they're hungover, they have low vitality, right? You need vitality to be able to do things. It's like a supporting factor for flourishing.
Yes.
So that's the flourish acronym.
Fabulous. Another topic I think would be useful to come back to is the mattering. And there's other aspects of flourishing and the other aspects of flow, I think, that have to do with that becoming something that suddenly disappears in retirement, right? There's a presence, there's an ego, there's a self that has to be redefined. And that process of flourishing as somebody who is in the peak of their career, and then having to redefine what that flourishing looks like after a career. Oftentimes people will just move on and create a whole other career because that idea of mattering from a professional standpoint really, really means a lot to them. So I'd love to come back to that one.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to dig a little further into this idea of what drives us and purpose, because I think that you've done some work on the difference between purpose-driven and achievement-driven. Purpose-driven probably being, I'm going to guess, more intrinsically motivated, and achievement-driven maybe being for some kind of external ends. I'm curious to hear you talk about the neurochemistry of those two things. What is happening when we are being purpose-driven versus when we are being achievement-driven? And then what are the side effects? What are the fallout of those two different approaches? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the difference between maybe a purpose-driven life as opposed to an achievement-driven life.
Sure. All right, great question. Thank you, Gillian. So it's important to recognize, first of all, that there are similarities between the two in that they can both be pursued as ends in themselves. Whilst achievements, I clarify that because it seems on the face of it like purpose is something we always pursue as an end in itself. We all want a purposeful life and do purposeful things, but achievements, they just seem to be means to other ends. Well, it's not that straightforward, and that's one of the reasons why accomplishment is included as one of the key domains of flourishing in positive psychology, because sometimes we just pursue an accomplishment for the sake of an accomplishment. You see this, you talked about childhood earlier in this, and children, for example, sometimes do things just to show that they've mastered something, or they're really good at something, right? They're mastering their environment in some way. They're learning a skill in some really good way. And we're not unique amongst all creatures for doing this. Animals, in their natural environments will sometimes do things just to demonstrate mastery over it, right? And it's nice to be good at things, and it's nice to demonstrate we're good at things. It's nice to show you possess a skill in some way, and accomplishment is often precisely that. So it's not that accomplishments are always simply extrinsically motivated, badges we want to wear and stuff, and achievements to show off, sometimes to prove to ourselves we can do something. But it's also a nice feeling when you're good at something. I'm sure you experienced that. Figure skating,
CrossFit,
I was about to say you're excellent at CrossFit, right? And so on. So it's nice to not just to show off your skills to others in these areas, but to prove to yourself you can do these things. And it's a great feeling when you're great at doing something, right? It's wonderful to reach a certain level. And that relates to other areas of flourishing too, like fulfillment of potential. So there is a similarity across these, right? And so we can't disentangle them that much. A purpose-driven lifestyle, as it were, or attitude towards work, and an achievement-focused attitude towards work. But we can identify, some key differences nonetheless. If someone is purely motivated by achievements with no underlying meaning beneath that, no kind of other overarching meaning, then that's unlikely to give them the same degree of long-term fulfillment as something that that ties in with the sense of meaning and purpose they attach to whatever it is that they're doing. Why is that? Well, because research has shown that having a strong sense of meaning about what we do with our time and about our lives as a whole significantly improves our well-being. A sense of purpose does the same. And so if it is just seen as a list of achievements without something deeper, then it's unlikely to contribute towards your well-being and improve them as much as meaningful work can. And we tend to derive greater meaning from things that motivate us intrinsically. So the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is very simple. It's the idea that extrinsic motivators are rewards or punishments that come from things external to us, such as the promise of a pay raise or commission, or the threat of a fine if you park in a certain place or don't do a certain thing. Those are extrinsic motivations. Intrinsic motivations are things that come from within us, beliefs, desires, a sense of meaning or purpose about what we're doing, and they tend to be much stronger motivators, but also have a much stronger impact on our emotions for obvious reasons. They connect with our own psychology in much deeper ways. Now, you can't just invent a purpose-driven lifestyle or purpose-driven work. It's something that kind of comes to you over time. You sometimes discover it by trying out various things and discovering that you enjoy certain things more than others. You find certain things more meaningful than others. But you can engineer it to a degree by doing some work on yourself to identify what kind of things you find meaningful, how you like to spend your time, what you want to do with your time, and then trying to find work that connects with that and helps to drive that as much as possible. It doesn't have to directly map onto it, but as long as it can relate to it, in some reasonable way and potentially in a strong way, then that can really help a person to find more meaningful work. But you have to kind of reach a certain stage of life to be able to do that reflection. If you ask someone who's 20 years old, do some real reflection of what you really enjoy doing with your time, and they haven't yet experienced the world of work very much yet. Right. You need to actually go out and try these things first, before you can, figure out, okay, well, because then you can reflect, like, well, actually, I really liked doing that. That surprised me that I really liked doing that, but I did really like doing that. Maybe that's something I'd like to do more of, and so on.
Yes.
So those are kind of key stages.
It's that, again, there's these life transition moments that I think are really important too. pull the curtain back and talk about, right? And one of them is that when you are in transition because of something sudden happening to you, maybe your spouse passes away or you lose your job or you are suddenly forced into retirement, those are really scary moments that I want to talk about in a minute, because they're like the opposite of flourishing. Those are the moments where you have to find your mettle. You have to really find the deep place in you that's got the strength. But those are also the moments where you have that opportunity to just take a beat and do the work and figure out what that purpose-driven life could look like and what really, really matters to you. Because another thing I remember about my niece was feeling like, oh, there was a very clear prescribed checklist I was supposed to hit. And it didn't even matter if it was connected to my purpose. I was supposed to hit it because society says you do these things. And then you reach your maybe mid-40s, 50s, etc., and you have this golden moment where you can start to decide who you are based on those purpose questions that you're talking about. And that, I gotta say, is when flourish starts to become a possibility, because that F fulfillment piece is super, super strong. So I guess maybe one of the things to talk about next is, if we can buy the idea that as we mature, we start to accumulate the resources that give us options, right? We start to accumulate either the wealth or the time or the knowledge to be able to even have the capacity to be able to ask those purpose questions. How does this personal understanding I can start having about flourishing, how can that help keep someone's mindset on track as they continue to develop wealth, but also as they start to walk through some of these life crisis moments? How can we use this to keep us on track? It's fuel. It's definitely a useful acronym, and it's a useful set of terms, but maybe practically or in terms of examples you've seen, what do I do with it now?
Absolutely. So, I've mentioned already that theories of flourishing focus on the things we pursue as ends in themselves rather than as a means to an end. And I think a common mistake people make in our day-to-day lives is to confuse means with ends. And I think this often happens, perhaps more than anywhere else, with the pursuit of money. Money is always a means to an end, in that you can do anything with money. It has, limitless possibilities. There's sets of things you can do with it if you want to categorize it in terms of where you can save it or you can spend it on things or experiences. So you can categorize it, but then of all the things you could spend it on, of all the experiences you could spend it on, all the ways you could save it or invest it, there's limitless possibilities, right? Infinite possibilities, ways you can use it. And so it can't be an end in itself, because there is no one end to which you can use it. Right. It would have to be, this is what money is for, this is what it ultimately gets to, in order for it to be an end in itself. But it's not, it's a means to an end, which nothing wrong with it, that's just what money is, right? But think of how many people forget that throughout their lives and keep pursuing it, even at significant cost, if you excuse the pun, to other areas of their life that they would even then say themselves are more important to them, such as building their closest relationships, pursuing happiness, developing a sense of meaning, finding fulfillment in their lives. But they say, well, I can't do those things because I've got too much on my plate. I'm working too many hours. I couldn't possibly spend the money on that. Now, saying that when you're 25, maybe. You don't typically have many resources at that age. Most people, they don't, not many savings at that age and so on. They're not in a position to do these things yet, and they have their whole lives ahead of them. They can take some time just to really grind out their careers and do that later in life. But you get people who say this for decades, and it's like, well, when are you going to, use what you've accumulated here to invest in these other areas of life that you've been neglecting for years or maybe decades, and saying you're going to change, but when? And often it's when I retire. Well, some people, they never really fully retire, and some people, they imagine that when they retire it would be this kind of heavenly time where they have all the time in the world to do these things, where their physical health and mental health will be as good as it is at that stage of their life, and they want to do the same kind of things they're doing now. But as with any significant stage of life, these things often change, right? So why does that sometimes happen? Well, one of the reasons, I think, is because the means gets confused with an end. That the pursuit of money, accumulating more and more wealth, becomes regarded as the end in itself, even though it is always the means to some further end.
It's a very flexible medium, but we have to figure out what it's for. We can't just make it about itself. It's often not used for that end. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with saving a substantial amount of money. If you look at research on the correlation between the ways we use money and happiness, the best way to use money is to save money. It provides you with a bedrock of security, of freedom, of
peace of mind if you were to need like substantial healthcare at some point in the future, or look after your children and so on and so forth, right? Nothing wrong with doing that at all. My point is more this, is that in our day-to-day lives, if we look at those key areas of flourishing I've mapped out, such as relationships, mental, physical health, fulfillment, and so on. And if you think about the kinds of things that people want to do with their time, but often complain they don't have the time to do them, and the main reason often given is because they're working so much, what if they were to ask themselves, well, what are my aims of accumulating this degree of wealth, of all this money? And of those, are there some that I'm neglecting too much now or in the near future that I don't want to neglect as much as I am neglecting now, but I'd actually like to use this money to build my relationships more, to see more of the world, to buy myself more freedom, to have certain experiences I haven't yet had, and actually use the money less for things that research shows are not good use of money for happiness. So of all the ways you can use money, spending on material possessions is the one that gives you the least amount of happiness. It typically gives you a sort of quick dopamine fix.
Dopamine,
like, great,
yep.
That's cool. I've just bought that new car or whatever, that new watch, but then it fades away pretty quickly. A better use of money is to spend it on experiences, or to save it. As I mentioned, that's the highest one, or to donate it, or give it to a good cause, or to use it for experiences where you're supporting others, maybe taking your family out for dinner or on holiday, whatever it might be. So that's one of the key points I would make about the problem of the way we see money in relationship to supporting our lives. It plays this fantastic supporting role, but we often confuse it with an end in itself, and to the neglect of other more important areas like relationships, for example.
Terrific. I've got so many places I want to go with that, but the first place I want to go with that has to do with me, I like to talk about muscles, the muscle of remembering your purpose and knowing what a healthy flourish looks like for you. That when we get bogged down in maybe being too overinvested in one or two of those areas and we forget about the other areas, it's important maybe to start that conversation in your 20s to try and remember, so that you don't get to your late 30s and 40s where you're up to here in debt, you've got way too many kids and way too many responsibilities, and all you can really do is go one day to the next because you're overwhelmed. So when should we start flexing these muscles of understanding our recipe for flourish?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the earlier the better, in a way. I think there's certainly a strong place for educating kids at school about flourishing. I started learning about it first year university because I did philosophy as an undergrad, and you start studying. Typically in a typical undergrad program, you'll study ancient philosophy, and Aristotle and flourishing is a staple part of that course. So I guess I was lucky there. Philosophy being taught more and more in high schools, you can learn about this there. I think early in life you can learn about this, but we don't want to set the bar too high. Identifying your purpose in life is a very difficult thing to do, and it's not that someone's failing in some way if they hit the age of 30 and they haven't yet identified it. There's not that kind of issue here. Your sense of purpose in life can change a lot over your lifetime, and it's not something you should worry about if you haven't yet discovered it. It's something that you may discover through the course of your life. But nonetheless, it is important to recognize what your values are, what some of your key aims for your life are, and which the kind of most fundamental areas of life are that you want to focus on in order to build your well-being and live the happiest life you reasonably can. And that's where the 8 areas of flourishing come into this. And then as you go further in life, ask yourself questions foreseeing how you might look back on things. So this is where you can use like powerful kind of coaching questions on yourself. So a powerful question in coaching is one that invokes a high level of thought and reflection about something. It typically begins with what. And so you could ask yourself something like this. What is one thing that you... imagine you're in old age, say you're 85 years old or older. What is one thing you'd love to look back in your life with pride at? So you're looking back and imagining things you've done, and then thinking, well, okay, how can I get to there? Okay,
sure.
So let's say they raised wonderful children, or they had a fantastic career as a writer, or they'd visited and experienced certain cultures in the world. They really wanted to experience someone, learn certain languages, whatever it might be.
There's
another
the goal.
one is another one is to ask yourself about things you're going to regret now and taking action to prevent yourself doing them. So another powerful question I like to ask is, what is one thing you're doing now in your life that you're going to regret, but you're not yet taking steps to change?
Very good. Very powerful.
Right. So it might be that someone spends 3 hours a day on their emails, and they're aware of this and they hate it, and they're like, why the hell am I not doing anything about it? One way to do that is like, I know I'm going to regret this, right? I know how much time I'm going to regret how much time I spend looking at WhatsApp. I'm going to regret that, for example, and emails. I know I'm already going to regret these. That's why I try to reduce it as much as I can. And doing something about it. Yes. A lot of people know the things that they're doing that they don't want to be doing, or they know the things they want to do, but they're not doing anything about it. Then take the action to change these things.
Fabulous. I really like those questions, and I really like the emphasis on values, because that is something that if you're careful and crafty about how you phrase the question, you can ask that question of a 10-year-old. You could ask that question of a 20-year-old. You can ask that question of a 50-year-old, and you're going to get some reflection, and you're going to get some honest looking inside to figure out what really, really matters to that person, to help chart that course to the purpose that they want to live. I want to go back to another thing you said, because a few minutes ago I said I got so many places I could go with this, but another thing you talked about was the best ways and the least satisfying ways that we can spend money. And one of the ways you touched on very quickly and then moved on was about donating. And I want to talk about that just a little bit, because this idea of pro-social behavior and philanthropy and giving, either physically giving of work or financially giving of money, is a big topic for multi-generational family wealth. It's also a big topic, I think, from a flourishing perspective, as far as the meaning that you want to know that you carried out in life when you're 85 and you look back, for a lot of people. So my question is there either any studies or any work that you've done to help us unpack what happens to the individual? Never mind the mission they might be funding or the work they might be doing, but what happens to an individual when they do that behavior, when they are pro-social with their money or their work?
So research on kind of the ways in which we can use money and the return we get on well-being goes back quite a long way. And some of the first time I came upon this research was in Martin Seligman's book Flourish, actually. In that book, he talks about ways in which you can use just small amounts of money to do things and get immediate boosts to your happiness from doing it. So in his book Flourish, I think he talks about how he used like $10 to go and buy a bunch of tickets, I think, for something. But what is this?
And he handed them out. I can't remember exactly.
Tickets to win something, or tickets you could use to do something with, or they were like maybe postal stamps. I don't know what it was, but a bunch of tickets, and he gives them all away, or gives this example of something that people did in a research study, and they immediately felt a lot better after doing it, right? And there's been much research since on, and probably going back way before that. I don't know the exact history of the research on the relationship between donating money, giving away, using it to support others, and how it benefits our own well-being. Obviously, as much as or in many ways, it benefits the well-being of others through doing this as well.
There's a multiplier effect, right? Because you're feeling better, and other people are benefiting.
Exactly. So I don't know the exact history of the research, but that was where I first came across it. And Flourish was published in Martin Seligman's book Flourish was published in 2011. So there's been much more research on this ever since. As far as I understand it, when you use money for some cause that is meaningful to you, to support that cause, or to do something that improves the lives of others, for example, donating it to a charity you care about, or giving it to a friend, or helping a friend to support themselves with it, or someone else you love. It might be a child, with a child it's different. You have a responsibility to do that, right? So let's not use that example, but to maybe another family member that needs your support and so on, that you get a boost of your emotions, a boost of positive emotions, because you feel you've done something good to support someone who needs it more than you. That makes you feel a sense of goodness about yourself. It boosts your self-esteem. Makes you feel good because they're feeling good, or people are benefiting from your money in some way, and you care about that cause or about those people. So that has this pro-social benefit for you. So there's a whole cacophony, if you like, or panoply of positive emotions that can be boosted through this process, and it can make you feel better about how you're using the wealth you've generated to do good for the world and so on. And that's why giving money away to causes you care about and are meaningful to you, or to people you care about and are meaningful to you, has been shown in research on happiness to be a more effective way to use money to improve your happiness than buying material things.
I think that's the kicker. You just said as well, which is they have to be meaningful to you. Like you have to have done the work that, rescuing animals or helping people with cancer or whatever the cause is that really, really causes you to feel something. If that work hasn't been done, then it's not going to have the same impact. It's got to be about the connection to your own fulfillment and your own,
absolutely.
I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can actually use this as an extrinsic motivator if you do the inverse to motivate you to do things. So there was an app a friend of mine used to use in grad school where if you didn't, you might know what the app's called, but if you didn't check in at a certain location on the app by a certain time every day, then the app would donate an amount of money of your choosing to a cause that you maybe really don't want to give money to, a cause that is not meaningful to you at all, to the point where you hate that
Very
cause.
interesting.
And this friend of mine would be like, okay, if I don't check in at the library at this time every day to work, and it didn't ask for a reason, right? But in his case, it was to work on his PhD dissertation. Then it would donate like as much as you choose, like maybe thousands of dollars to some cause that he really didn't want to support at all.
Wow.
So you could use it the other way around, and
for a habit formation.
Yeah, apparently that's quite a well-known app now as a kind of extrinsic motivator. Like let's imagine I was trying to build a skill of getting up earlier every day and checking in at this co-working space when it opens at 7 a.m. every day. Let's imagine I wanted to do that. Now, as it happens, I do actually get here at 7 a.m. Let's imagine I wasn't doing that and I wanted to do it again. It could be like, unless you check in there by 7 a.m. every day, you've committed to giving $5,000 to some political party that you would never vote for.
That is against
right? Something
what
like
you
that.
believe in.
And you're like, I'm not going to, and you wake up and you see the alarm and you're tempted to stay in bed. You're like, I'm not going to stay in bed. I'm not going to give them money. Right?
Well, that's fascinating.
The other way around as well.
Fascinating. That's really
I should add to that. I learned recently from Arthur Brooks' work, Arthur Brooks being the happiness researcher who works at the Harvard Business School. He shared research on his website on ranking the order of ways we can use money and how they correlate with happiness. So on the lowest level, he identifies 5 key things you can do with money: buying things, buying experiences, buying yourself more time to do things, like hiring like an assistant, for example, so you get more time back, giving that money to causes you care about, other people, or saving it for the future.
Wow.
And he points out that research has shown that the ranking in terms of relationship between happiness and how we use the money, at the bottom you've got buying things, buying material objects. Next up you've got buying experiences. Next up you've got buying yourself time. Next up you've got donating it or giving it away. And at the very top you've got saving your money for the future as the highest relationship between money and happiness.
That actually blows my mind a little bit, because I guess one of my beliefs as a wealth advisor has been money that sits still, and maybe this is a distinction, money that sits still produces the possibility of the owners becoming isolated. And that using your money and exchanging it for experiences or exchanging it for pro-social behavior and connection to a community is a healthy way to use money. So I'm fascinated by, I have to dig a little more into that saving thing being the thing that causes the most happiness. However, I could probably caveat all that with saying, I'm saving it not necessarily to make a big pile of coins that's going to gather dust. I'm saving it so that I have the optionality to do these other things and buy these experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons that it enables you to have all the other options.
There
you can
go.
give it away.
It's not about hoarding.
But it's not the only thing. It's also arguably more importantly than that is that saving money for the future buys you more freedom. Now, that's one of the reasons why buying yourself time is a good thing, because you then have more freedom because you have more time, right? So hiring, say, a cleaner or an assistant or something, you buy yourself some time. But also, if you've got enough savings that if you decide to quit your job, you can support yourself for 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years without significantly changing your lifestyle. That's a massive amount of peace of mind you have. You think about the amount of people who hate their jobs, but they can't quit because they don't have a choice. They need the paycheck each month. They're scared because they only maybe have enough to support themselves for, say, 3 months. And they're like, well, that might not be enough time to find other jobs. The job market's very bad right now. But let's say they've saved enough to support them for a whole year. Well, then there's freedom that comes from that, knowing that if I quit this, I'm going to be all right. I've got time to figure stuff out, to apply for other jobs, and I'll be okay. That is great for your mental health and well-being.
I have to agree with you on that. And it does buy you the time to afford reflection, where I think the person who is living paycheck to paycheck or doesn't have enough set aside to be able to take a step to the side or take a step to another industry or job, they literally can't afford reflection. They have to just keep going. So I agree with you on that. I will buy that saving gives you the most happiness. That works for me. I'll take it. I want to talk about two more things, and then I have a final question for you. The first thing has to do with what I referred to earlier as the dark side of flourishing, and it has to do with suffering, like the hard stuff. And how can we use those moments of emotional volatility to build resilience? Like it happens to us. Do we have to have a great big flourishing reservoir where we've been asking ourselves reflective questions for 30 or 40 years? Or in those moments, is the potential for flourishing still possible because we have this beautiful gift of an injury? We have this moment where we can use this emotional volatility to build some resilience. What's your work on that? Tell us a little bit more about your work on that.
Great question. I hold the view that whenever we find something difficult, cognitively, physically, emotionally, maybe all three, in most cases, that's a sign that gives us greater reason to do it than not to do it. In most cases, right? Why is that? Well, because growth comes from doing hard things in all three of those domains. Now, so we start with the most obvious one, the physical domain. It's well known that, for example, doing weight training, doing resistance training, your body goes through something called supercompensation, where muscles kind of tear and break down, but then with effective recovery, they rebuild stronger, such that the muscle gets bigger over time. With cardiovascular exercise, the further you push your body, for example, sprinting, doing high intensity training, explosive training, whatever it might be, as long as you support that with effective recovery, you become fitter, improve your cardiovascular fitness. Then it's got the cognitive domain. It's been shown in the science of learning that the more effortful learning is, the more effort you have to put in to do something cognitive, the more you learn. The more you retain the knowledge in long-term memory, the more that you build knowledge, the more you consolidate neural pathways. And so the more effort you have to make, the best the returns for you in terms of your cognition and your learning. Then in the emotional domain, the most difficult emotional experiences in life are often the ones that are most formative for us. When we think about the most difficult times we've been through, often we reflect on them as times where we experienced great growth afterwards, or where we became closer with certain loved ones as a result of the experience. That could all either be direct, when you really have a deep falling out with a friend, but then you patch things up, you become better friends afterwards, or you have a strong argument with a partner, you build the relationship stronger afterwards and learn more about each other. Or it can be that as a result of, say, supporting a family member who's very sick, other members of the family become closer as a result of that. Now, it's not the case in all of these things. Of course, you can have ineffective recovery practices, and pushing yourself too hard physically can do, damage. If you consistently push yourself too far cognitively without following you up with, regular sleep and so on, again, it can be, cognitively exhausting. And emotionally, you can, undergo trauma and have, post-traumatic stress disorder if you have certain extremely difficult emotional experiences. So it's not always the case, but in most cases, the more difficult you find something, that gives you more of a reason to do it in terms of the growth you will experience as a result of doing it. So, to connect that up with your question, suffering, to a degree, is often a pathway to greater flourishing. If we're thinking of suffering broadly as, be it physical suffering, emotional suffering, or cognitive suffering, going from pretty low level, like thinking really hard about something, to pretty deep level, going through a really difficult emotional experience like bereavement. These things do, to quote Nietzsche, who got this quote from Goethe, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, it's not always the case, but it's often the case.
Yes. And I think you said it at least 5 times. Recovery is a huge part of that, and giving yourself the knowledge and the skills to know how to recover in all of those instances. We know how to recover from a set at the gym. We know that sleep is probably good after studying for a big exam. We don't always know what we need when we go through something of an emotional nature. We don't really know. It's not really modeled for us. It's not. So I think just knowing that you got to give yourself that grace and that space to recover, whatever that means for you. And maybe that's a bit of an intuitive exploratory thing, depending upon the person. That's a huge part of every one of those things that you just talked about, is knowing how to recover.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. I mean, there is something called emotional exhaustion, right? Where you just feel completely emotionally exhausted after doing something. And that requires recovery, just like physical exhaustion or mental exhaustion does. You need to like have a sleep and bring down your sympathetic nervous system, recover you by engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, which kicks in after a perceived threat has passed. And so, you know, anything that takes its toll in a strong way on you physically, cognitively, or emotionally, or two or three of those, you can apply a lot of the same recovery techniques to them. Generally, a good recovery strategy needs to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of nervous system that kicks in after a perceived threat has passed, where you feel your heart rate go down, your breathing slow down, you feel calm, you feel a sense of peace and steadiness, and also it takes your mind off the thing that's stressing you out, which is why flow is great, because flow takes your mind off things stressing you out.
Flow, yes, and also sleep. I gotta say, sleep is like the highest form of recovery
is the top
for me.
one. Yeah.
It is the best.
Sleep is the best of all recovery strategies, and sadly it's not taken anywhere near seriously enough by enough people. But if there's a thing that's well worth prioritizing, a skill well worth building for all of us, it's sleep.
Fantastic. To the last question about family culture. If we talk about the family culture around flourishing, if we talk about how to be around people of other generations, right? Not just young people. I mean, I've got kids, but I've also got siblings and I've got parents. What can I make as part of my time that I spend with family to create more of a family culture around flourishing? Is it conversational? Is it directive? Are we giving advice? What do you think when it comes to creating a family culture of flourishing?
Right. One way that you can build your relationships effectively with each other, that has been shown to be highly effective, is to express gratitude to each other. So gratitude has remarkable impact on our well-being. It's one of the best kind of research-backed practices we can do, but you can also do it pro-socially with other people. Express gratitude to each other. I am grateful to you for this thing you did to me in my life. And if you really want to go to the highest level with it, it would be to write a gratitude letter to someone and read it out to them. Now that's pretty intense, but research has shown that significantly improves the happiness of both parties, that the recipient of gratitude often gets even higher returns on their well-being and happiness than the person expressing the gratitude to them. In Britain, it's much harder, I think, to do this. But nonetheless, that's an excuse, right? We can do this more. Express gratitude to each other, things that we're grateful to others for. Thank you so much for doing that for me. It meant a lot to me, and here's why I'm really grateful to it. But in a sincere way, and if you want to go to the whole other level, write a letter. I've written a whole blog on this in my Substack. Another way is to regularly just check in with your loved ones. So Robert Waldinger and Mark Shulz, who wrote a book called The Good Life and How to Live It, and Robert Waldinger is director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest ever study of human life mentioned earlier, and Mark Shulz is the associate director. They, in their book, the most recent book on that study, they describe simple techniques you can do to build your relationships, because the main finding from that study has been that relationships are the greatest predictor of long-term health, happiness, and well-being. And they describe simple things you can do. Like, I went to a talk they gave in London once. They said, right, guys, I want you to all just get out your mobile phones right now and think of a friend that you haven't spoken to, or a loved one, might be a family member or someone that you're close to, you haven't spoken to in a while, and just send them a simple text saying, hey, I was just thinking about you. I just wanted to check in. How are you doing? These simple actions can, as they put it in their book, create long-term ripples of well-being, in the sense that a conversation then emerges, you might arrange to meet coffee, and that important relationship doesn't crumble. Okay, it's these simple steps we can take to stop our relationships crumbling. I've written a blog on this, how to build your relationships to improve your happiness, that again I can share on your show notes. But it doesn't take a lot of work, just simple things we can do.
Sure. And I think, like I said earlier about muscles, is that, if you use them, they develop. So even if being outward with your gratitude and using more than just 2 words to say thank you is hard at first, it probably gets easier over time. And the more you do it and the more you get that feedback loop of how you felt doing it and the joy that you caused for the other person, that's gotta be. Those are amazing ideas. Thank you very much for that. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Very, very
I mean,
actionable.
Absolutely. And I mean, more broadly, it's to not see the time we invest in our social lives as kind of wasted time. The Waldinger and Shulz, for example, in that same book, have a whole chapter on a concept they call social fitness. And another good book I recommend is by Casley Killam. It's called The Art and Science of Social Connection. She talks in that book about social health. And the argument of both of those three researchers is that we should treat our social health and social fitness, they're interchangeable terms really, as importantly as we treat our physical health or our mental health, or our physical fitness or our mental fitness, if you like. In the sense of the research shows the benefits for our long-term well-being, happiness and health is as substantial, if not even more substantial, from building our relationships than from prioritizing our physical fitness or focusing on our mental health. So it's an area of life well worth a strong investment of time, money, attention, energy. Building your close relationships. The most important relationships, or all relationships, contribute to our well-being and happiness. That's another finding from the study. Even your what are called weak tie relationships with your like barista in your local cafe and stuff. But the most important ones are with the people closest to you. How do you know who they are? Ask yourself this question. Who could I call in the middle of the night if I'm sick or scared?
Yes.
All right.
Those are
so
your
when
people.
you ask yourself that, you don't just think of anyone. It's like to call up someone in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and then to answer the phone, be like, "Are you okay?" Rather than, "Why are you calling me?" You think of, you think of your siblings, maybe you think of your parents, you think of your best friend, you think of your partner, whoever it might be, right? It's certain people. Those are your most close relationships, and those are well worth a strong investment of time, energy, attention, and money.
I love that. And I think as somebody who I will admit, at least in a past life and still to this day, I'm an introvert, and I see social connection as a bit of work. But I also see that it can often get confused or combined in with things that we are obliged to do instead of things that are going to feed back for us a positive feeling. And when you see how necessary social connection is in the creation of your career or the building of a business or the maintaining of a family, like all of those things, they feel like reps that maybe you're going to be a bit tired by the time you've done all those reps. But if you're doing them, I guess, with a different intrinsic purpose, which is that you're doing them for the sake of your own fitness, you're doing them for the sake of your own health, you're doing them to create a feeling of reciprocity and generosity in your family, that's a whole other reason for doing it, right? It's not the money reason, right? It's not the checkmark reason. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I have one last question to ask you. In closing, I'm going to ask this of every single guest, and I actually got the idea from you when you talked about the inverse pet peeve. And as part of something that I want to create as an ongoing list for my clients and my family and my kids so that they can enjoy as many of the 1,440 minutes of every single day, I was hoping you would share with us what I'm going to relabel as the moment of bliss. One or two or three things that you look forward to in your day as moments of bliss that you could share with our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Let me just add that I got this idea of inverse pet peeves from Bree Groff, who recently published a book called Today Was Fun, and that's discussed in an article in the New York Times Well section called Happiness Doesn't Have to Be a Heavy Lift. And an inverse pet peeve is a small action that disproportionately boosts your positive emotions. Inverse because a pet peeve is a small action that disproportionately boosts your negative emotions, right? You get frustrated about a small thing, right? So for me, inverse pet peeves are cycling through the park on the way to the office. Now, I get this in London, but not New York, because New York, between where I stay in New York, Midtown East, and the office, which is Meatpacking District, near the West Village in Chelsea, there isn't really a park. You can't cycle through a park. There's only one big park you can cycle through in New York, right? Whereas in London, there's loads of smaller ones. And I cycle through my local park on the way to the office in the morning, and I love it. I did it this morning at like sort of 6:50 a.m. it would have been roughly, and people walking their dogs, the sound of the birds singing, sun still sort of rising. It's kind of pretty much ridden by them, but it's still on the way to rising to full risenness.
Yes, marvelous.
Yeah. Highest point in the sky. I just feel great doing that. I was thinking about another one, actually. I was thinking about this during that bike ride this morning. Another one is on a Saturday morning. I don't do this much at the moment, but I used to do this a lot. I used to often wake up and go and play pickleball at about 10:30 a.m. Play till about 12:30 outside in my local sort of pickleball centre, and on the courts with a group there. And then I'd just kind of walk leisurely. I'd have coffee then with the pickleball players, and then walk in a leisurely way back to my apartment and sort of grab a coffee, grab a bite to eat at the local shops. And I know a few of these shop owners because on my street, pop in some, a couple of local shops, and there's just this lovely Saturday afternoon camaraderie on the street. Yes. And the thing I love most about that is the freedom of time during that time, where people aren't rushing off to do something because it's Saturday. They're not packing out every minute of their schedule. They're just being in the moment, and they're free. And I feel that freedom. I'm like, I don't know what time it is, and I don't care what time it is, and I'm just going to wander around and have a coffee, have another coffee. Maybe at this point I've had like 4 coffees. I'm going to have a coffee, and I'm going to just pop in that shop and just look at things that I don't really need, but I'm just going to enjoy looking at them and chat to the local barista. Because I do think that's important for your well-being, to schedule time where you're not packing it with goals and rushing off to the next thing. Because most people's working days, they're rushing off to the next meeting. It's full of goals every moment, which is fine for some of our time, but not all our time. So that's kind of a weekly inverse pet peeve, and the daily one, is cycling.
I think that, the both of them they speak to kind of a return to that childlike state of freedom, of, not having to worry about a car being next to you when you're cycling through the park, of having the presence to be able to feel the morning, like feel and hear and listen and experience the senses, and also the freedom of time. Man, that's got to be a huge one for a lot of people to experience bliss. Thank you very much for everything you've shared with us today, Dr. Jon Beale. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as we enjoyed having you.
Yeah, had a great time. Thank you.
Wish you a great day.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you.